Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about Air Fortress on the NES. Air Fortress has a pretty basic story. You're a guy who comes from a planet that has just started space travel. They come across a series of air fortresses that kind of act like space locusts. They go from one planet, absorb all the resources, and then move on to the next. And you learn that these air fortresses are headed towards your planet, which kinda sucks for you guys. Somehow, your people have built an entire fleet of spaceships, and they send those out to destroy the air fortresses. But they end up being defeated, because if they didn't, we wouldn't have a game now, would we? So once that first plan fails, they decide a better plan is to send one dude on his weird space speeder and his power suit with some pretty crappy weapons to go and blow up all the air fortresses. Which, if you're good at the game, you end up doing. Much like Ghosts and Goblins, there are two parts to this game. You play through the first 8 stages, and then you're told, hey, everything you did was for naught, and the air fortresses are starting up again. You then go through those 8 stages again, blow up the air fortresses again, and then you get the actual ending, which is just your basic screen that says, congratulations, good job, you did it. It's surprisingly void of any meme-worthy material. It's just your typical, hey, you won, good job, congratulations. It's kind of refreshing to see something like that. The gameplay is surprisingly good. There are 2 parts to each stage. You have a horizontal shooter, which leads you into the entrance of the air fortress, and then you've got kind of a Metroid style of gameplay when you're inside. You're moving from room to room, attacking enemies, and generally getting lost as these levels get more complicated as you move on. There are 2 things that you need to do once you get inside the air fortress. The first is to blow up the reactor core, and the second is get the hell out of there before the thing explodes. This is sometimes easier said than done. And really, the first level kind of tricks you into thinking this is going to be easy, because as soon as you blow up the reactor, you just walk past it, and there's your exit. It's kind of a tease, because once you get to the second level, that's not the case anymore, and you need to find the exit. If you forgot your way to the reactor, then it gets kind of confusing, and that adds to a lot of the challenge and also ramps up some of the tension in the game. Let's back up really quick. On the shooter stage, there are a few things that you need to do in order to be prepared to get into the air fortress. You need to gather up all your resources, essentially. When you're in this little shooter level, you're going to come across E-bubbles, these little B-bubbles, and those are going to be essential to getting through the air fortress. The E-bubble will give you an extra 100 energy, and the B-bubble gives you kind of bombs or missiles or rockets or something. Those rockets are going to be a lot stronger than your regular blaster, which is kind of like throwing toilet paper at a gorilla. There is also a little plus bubble that will destroy all the enemies on the screen during the shooter stage, and then there's a diamond bubble that will grant you temporary invincibility. These 2 never show up when you actually need them, and the only times I've seen them have been when I've killed random enemies on the shooter screen, or if I've blown up one of the stationary enemies. I don't remember coming across them just kind of hanging out and waiting for you. Either way, they're not really worth it, in my opinion. They don't come up when they're actually needed, and yeah, it feels like they're a holdover from an arcade game that this could have been at some point. Once you're in the air fortress, the E and the B bubbles will actually appear randomly. Once you kill certain enemies, they'll drop them, and they can help out, but sometimes you're kind of stressing to find them. There are these weird yellow, or not yellow, but orange and red butterflies that always seem to drop them, which is kind of fun when you come across those, especially if you're not very good at the game and you've gotten hit a bunch of times and you're running low on energy. So the energy, once you get into the air fortress, acts as your health meter. When you get hit, it'll drop by 10, but it also goes down whenever you move or use your jetpack, which can be annoying, but it kind of helps you figure out what you need to do when you're playing this. And it adds a bit of strategy and also a little bit of tension when you're playing this, especially if your energy is low. Of the two stages in each level, I think the Metroid levels are much better. They're just a lot more fun, the physics are better, and they can take a lot longer, which, in my opinion, makes them better levels. The shooters can get kind of boring, and they're not really worth it, in my opinion. It's nice that they're there, but I would have rather just had a little cutscene that leads you to the actual air fortress where you can run around and blow stuff up. Once you blow up the reactor, that's when stuff kind of gets a little crazy. The screen gets a little bit darker, you'll find some flashing lights along the way, and you need to get out before the place explodes. If you take too long or you just take a while to get to the exit, the screen will start to shake and the music will kick up and make it a little bit more, stressful and tell you, hey, something terrible is about to happen. If you don't get out in time, then the whole screen goes white and you just get told, hey, you're dead, you need to start over. Dying in this game is incredibly annoying, especially with the shooter stage. You have one-hit deaths, where it is very much like an arcade shooter. Once you get into the air fortress, it'll take a little longer for you to die, but you do need to kind of start over, which sucks. In the shooter stage, if you die, you pick up right where you died, and you have 3 lives to make it to the air fortress, essentially. When you lose your 3 lives, then you get kicked back to the start screen. However, you do have a continue option. So if you've died 3 times, you can pick up at whatever air fortress you died at, and then you have to go through the shooter stage again. I wish this was the case with the Metroid levels, but it doesn't seem like it is, where I would die in there and then I would just get kicked back and have to start over. This might have been because I only had 1 life when I went in there. I just can't really remember off the top of my head. Oh, one cool thing about the enemies. You will occasionally meet other people in spacesuits, and they kind of act like an evil version of you, or like a doppelganger or something. So you can kind of imagine that they're other people that have gone into these levels and either died and are now working against you, or they were members of other species or something like that who just happen to have the same spacesuit that you do. It's kind of cool to see that sort of thing. It doesn't really change a whole lot. They are probably the most annoying enemies in the game, but it's really cool to see that stuff, at least in my opinion. Overall, the gameplay is okay. The shooter levels aren't anything special, and the Metroid levels are much more fun, but they still have issues, like not having a timer at the end of the level, where you blow up the reactor and then you don't really know how much time you have to get out. You just know that it's not a lot. They do offer some exploration and a little bit of strategy where you need to decide what you want to do first. Do you want to blow up the reactor and then scramble to find the exit, or find the exit first and then work your way towards the reactor? Either way, it's going to get a little complicated because you have to try to remember how to get to the exit on each level. It can be a very hard game, but it's a lot of fun to play. The game either looks average or it'll look really boring. The opening cutscene looks good for the NES, especially in the late 80s. The other cutscenes are also pretty good. It's kind of nice to see your character land a speeder bike, hop off it, and then head towards the entrance to the air fortress. It's also kind of cool to see your guy, flying out of the air fortress at the end. So you blow up the reactor core and make it to the entrance, and then you get a little cutscene of your guy flying away. It's kind of cool to see that, and I'm glad that it's in here. However, the shooter levels don't really look all that great. They're kind of boring. You're not going to see any parallax scrolling here, which makes sense because of the period that this game was released. And while it looks good at first, you realize you're just flying on a static background. Nothing's really going on there. The enemies are also kind of boring on the shooter levels. Most of them are just grayscale, and they don't really look like anything that would be all that threatening. You're also just looking at enemies that are following the same wave patterns or swarm patterns or stuff like that, and it makes you feel like you're just playing a generic shooter from the time period. In the air fortresses is when things get a lot more interesting from a visual standpoint. The enemies are more varied, they look a lot better, the character movements are more animated, or are animated, and things are just overall better. I wish these sections had been the whole game, honestly, because they just look considerably better than what you're doing on the shooter levels. Overall, Air Fortress has pretty good graphics. They aren't going to wow you at all, but they get the job done. If there was a sequel to this game, it would have been nice to see how they might have improved on things, like how they may have added more cutscenes to it. They might have been able to make the shooter levels more interesting, and maybe even a little bit longer, or just cut them out entirely, as I don't think they're really needed. I do think that there were some issues with the visuals, just because some things just don't look as good as they could. The shooter levels in particular, I feel like they could have looked a lot better. Parts of the Metroid levels probably could have been better, and it would have been nice to see what bosses would have looked like, especially for the shooter level. To have something that you need to blow up before you can get inside the air fortress, or have something guarding the reactors that maybe is more menacing, or something like that. It would have been cool if they had had more weapons, just to see what those weapons would have looked like instead of your regular blaster and the bombs. And the bombs kind of just look the same as your blaster. They do give off an explosion, which looks okay for the time period. And that's really the main thing with this. It looks good enough to be a late 80s NES game. It just doesn't do too much now when you look at it, and it sort of blends in a little bit with the other NES games. This is an okay game. It's challenging enough to keep a person playing, but there isn't much to it. The player alternates between two gameplay types, neither of which is done particularly well to make the game somewhat better. Nostalgia is really the biggest reason that I can see someone coming back to play this again. I would have loved to see what an Air Fortress 2 would have looked like. This is one of the games that I think could be great if the gameplay was a little better. It's a fun game, but it gets a little bit repetitive after you just keep doing the same thing over and over. The game has other problems, like not having a timer at the end of the Air Fortress levels was a little frustrating. The one-hit deaths on the shooter stages is annoying, but it fits with what you would expect from a shooter at the time. It just kind of felt like they didn't know what they wanted this game to be, And it also kind of feels like it's stuck in between being an arcade game and a console game. I do have quite a bit of nostalgia for Air Fortress. This was one of the few games that I owned in the early 90s, and I've got fond memories of playing it with my brother as we just tried to figure out all the weird stuff in this, and tried to remember where the hell we were when we were going through the different levels. While it isn't a great game, I enjoy going back and playing it every once in a while, just because of that whole nostalgia trip of going back and trying to experience something that I haven't experienced in probably 20 or 30 years. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.